Okay, let's get started. It's my really great pleasure to have Vili Lehdonvirta as our brunch talker today. I guess a little bit of an intro. So at the moment, Vili is research fellow in a very prestigious place, Oxford University. Oxford has this special institute called Oxford Internet Institute, and in addition to the fact that you're there, you also have other really big things going on for you. So Vili is a recent awardee of the so-called European Research Council ERC grant, which is really hard to get, and I'm really happy that you did get it, which allows you kind of build your own research team and then go into the research direction that you want to go next. Another thing which is interesting for us and kind of a comparison point, we have the PhD program or the doctoral school program here. Well, turns out that Vili has now been nominated to be in charge of the PhD program at Oxford Internet Institute. So we there also should compare notes. And we also thought that we should discuss about what do we do with this sort of researchers making startups and putting things on the market. We probably are going to hear about what you are doing now with the ERC money and what the current research topic is, but how we got to know each other was Vili joined our research team at Helsinki Institute for Information Technology, Digital Content Communities, around 2005?
2004.
4 or 5?
Remember, so about 10 years ago.
10 years ago, exactly. And at that time, we kind of had identified that there is this interesting phenomena that people are willing to invest real money in virtual things, in virtual worlds. So, could this be a relevant business model for digital services? And so that was what you started to study then. And, if you look at companies like Supercell, so it seems to be working.
Yeah.
So, I'm really happy that you're here. Vili Lehdonvirta.
Thank you, Margot. Thank you very much for the very nice introduction. Very nice to be here. It's very much like a homecoming in many ways, and really nice to see so many familiar faces here. So I joined HEAT in 2004 to do a master's thesis. I went to Olli. I went to Marco to ask for thesis ideas. And I think it was Marco who said that there's this strange thing going on with these people trading virtual items for real money. Why don't you look at that? That's what I started doing. But enough about my history. So, about my present, before I start talking about research, I wanted to, because I am now running the doctoral program, I have been since last year, I do need to advertise it a little bit. It's part of my job. So I have brought some brochures here. So those of you who are either considering doctoral studies for yourself or have students, bright students who would like to direct to apply to us, I'll just sort of leave these here, and then you can, or maybe I'll circulate some. If someone wants to pick them up while I'm talking, then if my talk is boring, then you can just concentrate on those. So you can, you just pass them on while they last, and then I have these smaller ones which are about how to obtain funding to fund your studies at Oxford, because it's not that cheap. I also edit the journal, which is kind of our department's journal called Policy and Internet. It publishes a lot of multidisciplinary research in the crossroads of social sciences, policy, and internet research. So I brought one copy. I'll leave it here. You can check it out. But I encourage you to consider it as an outlet for your excellent research. So that's in the commercial break. So now about what I was going to talk today. I understand that I have about, half an hour or 40 minutes before we go to Q&A. And by the way, feel free to interrupt me at any point. But I've thrown together a sort of number of different presentations here to try to trace a slightly longer arc, a bigger story than what I would usually do. And I've titled that story Online Labor Markets, Inequality and Global Development. So from studying virtual item trade in games, through various steps, I started studying online work or virtual labor. And that's the kind of pathway that I am. There are links, and I will talk about those, but that's the kind of path that I am on at the moment. And it's about the societal consequences and impacts of the kind of rise of these online labor markets that I'd like to talk today. So online labor markets or online staffing is a sort of rapidly growing market at the moment. It's seen, in some ways it's seen as part of this sharing economy, but in some ways it's also large enterprises are sort of using online staffing increasingly instead of hiring full-time workers, for example. It's promoted by some development organizations like World Bank, for example, as a means of accelerating socio-economic development in low-income countries. But it's also something that some trade unions are concerned about, individual workers, some workers that are concerned about. So it's a kind of very divisive phenomenon in that sense. Different perspectives that we can, oh, here's a picture of Odesk if you haven't seen it. Odesk is a leading marketplace for this kind of quite high skill specialized work from different categories, everything from web development to email marketing to personal assistant services to graphic design and everything. And then obviously at the low end of the market you have the Amazon Mechanical Turk and these micro tasks, which have become very well known, and they've been studied a lot in computer science as well. Ways of computer scientists have studied a lot, how do we kind of squeeze the maximum productivity out of these micro workers by optimizing algorithms and so on. But in terms of share of the market, this kind of micro labor, it turns out, is actually quite small. It's maybe only 5% of the total online labor market at the moment. Also part of the phenomena, so this is kind of how I got into this in the first place, is that...
So the pricing that you showed, it was
yes,
hourly wage of 5 cents?
Not hourly wage, it's per task. This is piece work.
So they say time allotted 60 minutes doesn't mean that you pay 5 cents?
No, you have 60 minutes to complete it, but you would expect to complete it in 30 seconds or something, depending on the task. This is a categorization task, that's probably asking you to categorize products or pictures or something like that. Other typical tasks are create tags for a piece of adult content. So this kind of tagging things, contents is very typical micro task type of work. So a lot of the services that we use every day, everything from Facebook to Amazon, they require a lot of infrastructure like this, a lot of very manual, menial labor that to accomplish tasks computers currently cannot do, to provide the services that they can. And that's what the microtask is about. Another category of work is online game labor, which is also quite a small part of the total market, I think, but it's a very intriguing part of it, which is why I keep studying it also. So, since there is demand for game items in online games, for example, some people earn their living by playing these games, producing the items, and then selling those items to players with money, for real money. And there's a complicated value chains involved in that market. And then finally there are this type of Clipwork farms that you may have heard of, which produce likes and Twitter followers and YouTube subscribers and Reddit upvotes and every manner of social media vote that exists today that has some kind of a value to an advertiser, for example, or a politician who wants to boost their apparent popularity or visibility in top lists, can go and buy from an Indonesian click farm, for example, a very large number of these votes for very cheap prices. And it also requires manual labor. If you want to, there's two ways of doing it. You can buy synthetic likes, which are produced by a network of bots, but they are easier to kind of catch and distinguish from the real thing. Or you can pay more for organic likes, which are harder to catch. Fair trade likes, I think, have not yet been invented. So there's a market opportunity for some enterprising open innovation person here. All right, so now some perspectives, and I won't talk much about theory today, but so to work and labor. So how do we need, so when I say perspective, what I mean is, all right, so we have this phenomenon going on there that work is being mediated by these platforms, and there seems to be some transformations in the relationship between the employer and the worker. There seem to be some transformations in the nature of the work and so on. So what kind of perspective do social sciences afford to analyzing that and then saying something about its potential consequences? Well, you know, you could just take labor economics, sort of microeconomic models of labor market, and you could look at the way in which the introduction of lots and lots of competition and the breaking down of collective bidding or collective bargaining by workers is changing the market structure, changing the bargaining power of different parties of the market, and in many cases to the detriment of the workers, that it will be harder for them to bargain higher wages. You could, in sociology, there are many different traditions that you could use to look at labor, but for example in labor process theory, the focus is on the concrete processes that the management uses to control labor power. That, for example, in Odesk, there's a lot of surveillance going on. That if you, as a worker, indeterminacy of labor power means that as a worker, you know, you're paid. Let's say you're paid per hour, as in Odesk. You have control over how you spend that hour. The management tries by different means to get you to do what the management wants you to do, but in the end, labor power is indeterminate in that sense. And then the different means that management takes to try to get you to do what they want is the sort of focus of this theory. And there's in these markets we see a lot of surveillance, for example, that in Odesk it's possible for employers to get. I have 2 people working for me on Odesk at the moment, and I get their screenshots every 10 minutes, and I see the rate at which they are hitting their keyboard and clicking their mouse, so I can surveil them and ensure that they're working hard on my tasks. And then, I don't know, this is slightly dubious term, post-industrial labor sociology, but there's a lot of discussion in the last 20 years about precarization of labor markets, how labor is becoming, or employment is becoming more precarious, unstable. Job tenures are shortening. Switching between occupations is becoming more common. Number of self-employed people is increasing. So this kind of traditional structured employment relationships and careers and corporate careers are breaking down, and we are turning into this kind of a gig economy where employment is very marketized and everyone is like a micro-entrepreneur. Well, in practice, these empirical evidence shows that these shifts have not been that fast as this kind of debate in the public around this phenomena suggests. But it's a real phenomena, and you can see these online labor markets as a kind of extension or at the cutting edge of it, because in these online labor markets there is no job security. Your employer's responsibilities to you last only up to the point when you complete the task, so you maybe 2 minutes or something like that.
So is it still so that there are big companies who are actually employers at that stage? But of course you could think about that there would be some of these micro companies that are micro enterprises that are using this one.
Well, for example,
so
for an Odesk, 60% of the employers self-identify as startups or I don't remember what the term was, but startups or some like single-person companies, something like that. So you're right that a lot of it is very sort of peer-to-peer and between individuals. And well, I should have maybe put that there then. For example, then Manuel Castells' network economy sort of hypothesis, or he kind of posits that we are moving away from this kind of binary models of capital versus labor into these kind of networked models of economic organization, where it's not that exploitation and power doesn't exist anymore. It's just that it does not follow a simple binary pattern of capital versus labor, but instead these more complicated models of power and exploitation following network patterns that also fluctuates and varies over time very quickly, as opposed to a binary labor versus capital setting. And I'm not really addressing that hypothesis or that debate in this talk, but I think that's the answer is very much still in the air, whether Castells is right or whether we can actually just continue to analyze things as capital versus labor, and that actually produces the most accurate picture. And then finally, I'm trying to hurry along because I want to get to some empirical stuff before I've used up my time. So then obviously international trade is a big aspect of this phenomenon. I mentioned that World Bank, Rockefeller Foundation, they're interested in online labor markets because they see them as a way of enabling virtual migration, where people in low-income countries can work for people in high-income countries and earn high wages, reduce global inequality in earnings, without the social costs of people having to move from place A to place B. There are many different perspectives that we can then use to kind of analyze this and see to what extent that's true. But I'm actually going to touch in this presentation kind of on some perspectives from economic geography and then value chain analysis, which is used a lot in development studies. So I have sort of 3 studies that I'm going to run through very quickly, maybe slightly ambitious. The first one is a qualitative study of some micro workers that I did at LSE between 2012 and 2013. The second one is I'm going to talk about analysis of log data mostly from Odesk. And then the third one, I'm going to talk about recent field work that we did in Southeast Asia, doing ethnographic interviews of people who earn their living through these online labor markets. So first this first study. The idea is that this first study will kind of focus on the problems of marketized work and the problems to everyday life that it may cause. And then the second and third one will illustrate maybe the potentials from the perspective of socio-economic global development and so on. So there's a story arc where we start from very negative things and then we move towards these more happier things. I'm just going to skip that. So this is basically a set of interviews that we did with 25 workers from the United States, Philippines, Nepal. This is actually old now because we did additional ones, so there's 10 from each. There's 30 total, I'm sorry. It was a information-oriented sampling, so you can't really generalize those numbers in this table much. But what it shows you is that we're talking about 3 very different types of groups. The US mechanical Turk workers are a little bit older, not very educated, often living with their parents, sort of in precarious situations, working many different jobs, or possibly relying on a partner's income or their parents' income. And actually what survey studies that other people have done is that this is a kind of not an uncommon picture. So that's the kind of mechanical Turker that you can expect to find, very precarious circumstances. And then the Filipino and Nepalese workers who were recruited by a platform called MobileWorks and another platform called Cloud Factory, they are younger, especially the Nepalese, they were all students, so they were very sort of optimistic about the future at the role of microwork in enabling them to gain work experience and earnings that will launch them on a fantastic career trajectory. Whereas the Filipinos, they've been doing, I was just in Manila a couple of months ago, and they've been doing all kinds of digital work for a decade now, thanks to Philippines being a major outsourcing destination for US companies. So they're quite disillusioned about the work in the sense that they don't expect it to provide them with a fantastic career, but at the same time they're not, given the lower living costs in the Philippines compared to US, they're not that precarious either as the American workers. So it's just cases on the map. Yes?
Do you have any numbers for the working hours that they would spend in a week?
It's very hard to measure because, and I've tried to get it in various ways, but it's very hard. You can do a survey, you can ask them, and you get some numbers, but the validity and reliability of those numbers is questionable, because the problem is they tend to do all kinds of things in the computer at the same time. So it's very difficult to say what part of the time is now work, what part part is paid work, what part is work but actually not part of the paid task. So there's a lot of investigating what are good tasks, investigating is this employer reliable, talking to other workers, networking with other workers, and then just doing something completely unrelated. They basically spend all their time online, and what part of it is work, what is not, I've had difficulty even conceptually distinguishing them. So I'm just...
But it's kind of people that sit behind the computer 8 hours a day still on.
Yeah, but then they also have other jobs, so they may go to those. But while they're at home, they spend, I'll get to that in a bit. So, typical problems that we find, well, uncertainty about the availability of work, not a big surprise, the same as in precarious labor in general. There's been talk about 0 hours contracts in Finland as well, right? You're employed as a cashier, but you don't know if you have any work next week or not. Similar issues with micro workers. Problems of, so this is quite interesting, a lot of talk about self-identity, because especially in the United States, people, as compared to Nepal or Philippines, people identify very strongly through their occupation. I am a plumber, I am a scholar, whatever. What if you do this kind of work that, first of all, no one around you understands very well necessarily. You don't understand yourself either necessarily why you're doing this, because some of these tasks you don't understand the wider significance of the work that you're doing, the social and cultural significance of why am I, for example, painting animals in video frames or something like that. If it's tagging porn, then you kind of understand why I'm doing this. But a lot of these tasks, because the employer really in a tayloristic way tries to break down the work into as little fragments as possible, from the perspective of a person who just deals with those fragments, the big picture is lost. It's hard to identify through that kind of work. And the further problem is you lack continuity. So today I'm transcribing receipts, restaurant receipts. and tomorrow I'm tagging porn, and then day after that I am answering to some psychological survey, and after that I am guinea pig for some computer scientist who wants to try something. So it's very hard to form an identity around this very fragmented work. Problems of self-control. So, and this is also quite interesting, because obviously if I told you in the beginning how in recent discussions in sociology have focused around how work is becoming more entrepreneurial and marketized and so on. If everyone becomes a micro-entrepreneur, then that means that suddenly everyone has to start to have the same kinds of self-management and life management skills as an entrepreneur has. A bureaucracy, a bureaucratic workplace, a factory or a university or something with rules and regulations, we often criticize those for being constraining of creativity and so on, but they also provide structure to your life. They provide structure, things like working hours that actually help people. They give a backbone to people. Without any of that structure, you have to spend a lot more effort or draw on some other resources to provide that backbone to yourself. You have to have self-discipline to wake up in the morning and stop working in the evening and so on. And so entrepreneurs who graduate from places like Aalto University, they train here. How do I manage myself? How do I write this big essay with a deadline here without no one monitoring me every minute? They form networks, support networks. They learn about tools for self-management. But what if you are more like a working class person who is suddenly thrown into this situation where, all right, now you are an entrepreneur, you have to manage every minute of your life yourself, without any support structure, without any education. People have been struggling with this. So both with getting work done, focusing on the right things at work, and then stopping work. So I see a lot of workaholism. People just work, and I had some fantastic quotes. Yeah, like, I find myself working on Mechanical Turk far longer than I intended, about 95% of the time. I'm starting to think it's a problem. Ha. This is a woman from Wisconsin in her 40s. And a 32-year-old male says, I do feel bad when I take a long shower or take too much time to eat. The work-life line is definitely blurry in this job. Right. And then they develop various coping strategies to these, both to the identity problems as well as to the self-control problems. But that's a topic for another. I'm writing a paper on that, but that's a topic for another presentation. They also self-organize, so they formed online communities where they would offer peer support to each other, use social controls to try to establish some structure to each other's lives, asking each other, are you online? Have you started working? Have you met your quota for today? The self-imposed quota. You said in the morning that you're going to earn $50 today. Have you done that? And this way brings some structure into their lives. But I won't talk too much about that either. So maybe in terms of conclusions, we can say that yes, there are this unstructuring and marketization of working life has implications beyond just economic insecurity. It has implications to social fabric and identity and so on. Especially in industrialized and post-industrialized countries where we're used to relying on employment as a glue that structures social life a lot. But then in some developing country settings where micro-entrepreneurship and subsistence farming are still the norm, that industrial organization has never really become necessarily the glue of society. Maybe in those contexts, micro-work and this kind of online work may fit into the social fabric in a different way. So on that note, we move to talking about geographies of online work. So this is part of an ongoing project that I'm doing with Mark Graham, who's an associate professor at the OAI, and Isis Hjorth, who is our postdoc, and a collaborator from University of Pretoria, Helena Barnard. And it's funded by the International Development Research Council, so they're interested in understanding what are the implications of online freelancing, basically, to development. The project title is Microwork and Virtual Production Networks, but actually we're mostly looking at more higher value-added freelancing, not microwork so much. We are collaborating with Odesk, so we have currently 6 months worth of full transaction data from Odesk. It's pretty cool, and there is so much analysis to be done with that. I've only started scratching the surface. Some maps, you can see that a lot of buyers in North America, Europe, Australia, sort of rich countries, but also in India and some Middle Eastern countries. Sellers, US is also a big provider of online freelancing, so a lot of Americans are providing them, but so is India and Philippines. This is not a very good visualization. Those of you who have studied visualization know that you shouldn't use a color density as an indicator of an amount when the surface areas are different, because Philippines actually has almost as many people as India, but it doesn't look that way because Philippines has a lot smaller surface area. Here's here's just a list of the top. So you can see buyers, rich countries, sellers, poor countries. So in this sense, the idea of trade, international trade, as a balancer, as something that helps to balance global inequality, provide earning opportunities to poor people from rich countries. Yes, that seems to be borne out on at least on a face level by this data. This is just trade balance. But this is what I did for my presentation on Wednesday. I gave this presentation at Liiken and Viestintäfoorumi where I talked about the basically Uber. Should Uber be legalized in Finland or not, or should taxis be deregulated or not? And it got a very good reception. You should check it out on YouTube. But I looked at how about in Finland, and I found that again, not a super great visualization. I'm still learning how to do this in R. But this is sellers, people in Finland who are selling. And I'm not allowed to say the exact numbers, so that's why it's just this stupid density graph. But mostly in the Helsinki area. But then we also there are some people providing graphic design from Kuusamo and programmers in Rovaniemi who are selling their services to global clients on Odesk. So it's quite interesting. So the question is, so we see these patterns, all right? Well, what explains these patterns? And we can take so what explains the patterns of geographic distribution of online work? And so there's a lot of work to be done there, but one very simple thing we've done so far is we've looked at, all right, how do institutional structures basically influence the global distribution of online work? So international business literature talks about the way in which business is embedded in formal institutions like professional legal regulations, which shape how some types of work are performed. And if you are from a different country, you have a so-called liability of foreignness, because when you try to provide services in another country with a different formal institutional environment, you're disadvantaged. You don't know the laws, basically. Same thing with informal institutions. Even if you speak the language, you may not understand the communication conventions and so on of a different country, and that may be an impediment when you try to enter a foreign market. So as a result of these, foreign contractors can be expected to incur a sort of liability of foreignness. So even though the internet and online labor market bring people together in terms of bridging the communication gap, bridging the time, bridging the space, we're hypothesizing here that they are not bridging the institutional gaps, and for that reason, that we should see foreign contractors being disadvantaged in relation to domestic contractors, even on online labor marketplaces like Odesk, where in theory space doesn't matter anymore. And so we basically test these hypotheses, and with a simple regression model, well, several regression models, but this just to show one or two. Basically what we find is that contractor experience and reputation have a big impact on the market, and that being foreign does have a big impact. So you're going to earn less, and I'll show you some dollar figures next. You're going to earn less if you're foreign and you're doing in relation to domestic contractor doing the same job. So even if we control for type of job, your experience, everything else, if you're from another country, you're going to be paid less for that job, and you're also going to have a harder time winning contracts. Now, interestingly, this interacts with the type of work.
Affect on what is the physical part of the kind of transaction? It is how you get the money.
Yeah.
So for kind of foreign kind of contractors, I suppose it's much more complicated.
You're absolutely right. I mean, payments are a huge issue in these markets, obviously because global finance is not that integrated yet. But among basically rich countries, you can just use PayPal, and the costs are reasonable. So payment is not necessarily in this case the biggest factor. But this foreignness penalty interacts with also with type of work in such ways that complex work, people who do complex work suffer a bigger foreignness penalty. So if you do simple tasks, it doesn't matter where in the world you are. But if you do complex work that requires maybe more communication, more intimate understanding of the customer's client's needs, then you will be at a more significant disadvantage. Also, if you do communications work, you do marketing work, for example, not a big surprise maybe that as a foreign contractor you will be disadvantaged compared to domestic. So some hourly rates, we find that so foreign workers earn an average of about $12 per hour on this market, which is quite not bad earnings. So you can see that Odesk caters, like I said, to a kind of higher value-added online work compared to mechanical Turk. Domestic workers earn almost twice as much, and that difference persists when we control the type of work, experience, reputation, and so on. Language and time differences are really complicated, so I'm not even going to go into that. But it's suffice to say that Odesk is mostly an English language marketplace, and then there are other kind of language and cultural sphere alternatives emerging. Like in Vietnam, they have VLANs.com, which is apparently very popular. Vietnamese people transacting with other Vietnamese people, as well as some people from mainland China who speak Vietnamese. And yes, like I said, there's an interaction with type of work. So, in conclusion, yes, I mean these online labor markets are kind of helping to bridge global inequities or barriers to trade, at least in digital and digitizable work. 90% of these transactions were cross-border. But we still find that foreign contractors suffer this liability or penalty because basically internet and connectivity can only bridge time and space, but it can't do so much to bridge differences in institutions. Or maybe those ways of bridging differences in formal and informal institutions have not been invented yet. So here's a business opportunity. How do we bridge the institutional difference between an Indian and an American? The fact that they watch different films, they have different legal systems, and therefore it's harder for them to do business together. Is there a technical fix to that? That's the challenge to you. Moving on, the final study. Here we are. So a networks perspective. So this is getting slightly into, sounds like a Castellsian territory, but not actually. So I'm here referring to this kind of global. So in economic geography and sociology, there are several different models, kind of network or chain based models of economic organization. Global commodity chains, global value chains, global production networks, and so on and so on. But basically, you can summarize the salient features of all of them by saying that basically what they posit is that trade and employment follows network structures. It's embedded in social networks. We deal with people whom we know. That's why we go to networking events, right? Social networks are used to bridge gaps in trust, bridge gaps in communication, and so on. So that's why we don't as easily trade with some random person off the street as we do with someone we know. And as a result, economic activities embedded in social networks. And this applies in, well, this was actually more a general Granovetterian sort of theory of social embeddedness of economic activity. And then specifically in international trade, these theories that I just mentioned, global production networks and so on, they apply this specifically to international trade. And what these theories try to do is they try to explain why, for example, a cocoa producer in Ghana, even though cocoa is a huge market globally, cocoa producers in Ghana continue to be very poor, and they only get something like 5% of the value of the chocolate that is then sold in global markets. And they explain this by network structure. Again, that if you are at a position where you only have one buyer because of geographic, because of economic institutional reasons, you only have one buyer who can buy from you, but that buyer has many different sources, suppliers, then you are at a very bad bargaining position, and you have to basically take whatever price that person tells you. Also because that buyer is the one who trades with the, let's say, the supermarket chain in Finland, that buyer is the one who accumulates knowledge about the customer's preferences, not you. So you're not in a position to upgrade your operations and start providing higher value added because you don't understand what's needed. But the chain, the links above you, they get all the information, they know what needs to be done and developed. So this is a kind of one way of visualizing that. But imagine that here is, let's say this is rich global north, and this is, let's say, Ghana now. There is one sort of boundary spanner who, like a Western organization who knows someone in Ghana who then knows the chocolate suppliers. And that person is in a very powerful position, of course. These people don't have any means of selling directly here. They don't know anyone. They don't have any links. They don't even have a common language. And the same applies to, let's say, software development, outsourcing, or any kind of digital work. Now, this change that's ostensibly brought about by online labor markets is they allow anyone directly, maybe not in chocolate, because these are for digital work, not for chocolate production, but for software development or graphic design. The online labor market, that platform where everyone can sign up as buyer or seller, it allows people to transact directly. And these gatekeepers, gatekeeping power, boundary spanners, gatekeeping power is eliminated. I can learn directly, if I'm this guy here, I can learn directly what are the customer's needs. I can upgrade my operations. I can earn more of the total value of the transaction. And to some extent this is borne out by the data. I won't go more in detail into that. Actually, let's go into detail quickly. To some extent, this is born out of data. So we see that this is, for example, from a marketplace, not from Odesk, but a similar marketplace for online game work, for virtual currencies, for virtual items, for power leveling services, which means that you play someone's character for them. And we see that countries with low labor costs are earning most of the money there on these marketplaces. But we also see, if we look then, depending on the different, we break it down into different categories of work, differences start to emerge. We see that Chinese producers are very good at bulk products, coins and items and so on. But more personalized, customized products like accounts and power leveling, actually US producers are dominant there. So, so that's actually basically, we can explain that with the same institutional approach that I just discussed before, that this is because the Chinese producers lack the institutional knowledge to effectively market and communicate these more complicated services, so they just stick with bulk services. So that's one way of explaining. But so one of the preliminary findings that we're finding, and this is now this is from our field work in Southeast Asia. We had a postdoc there for 3 months in Philippines, Malaysia and Vietnam, and I was there for 3 weeks myself. Interviewed close to 100 people who actually work on this marketplace and are living there, as well as policymakers, platform operators and so on. Still analyzing, huge amount of data, still analyzing. This is a preliminary impression, so to say. So, one thing we find is that actually through online labor market, some people are winning. So a lot of buyers, yes, no gatekeepers, so much less on this side, although we didn't study this side, we didn't study the buyers, so I can't say too much about that. But we find that here on the seller side, actually, some people are not getting any trade, and some people are getting all the trade. One way to explain that is the fact that, like, often these people, this would be someone who was doing exchange studies in the US, for example. So they're more embedded in the informal institutions. They know how to talk to Americans or Europeans, Finns, how to win trade from them. We also find that it has to do with the platform structure, the way the kind of social technical design of the platform. That's a whole different topic, and that's actually mostly what my ERC project is going to be about. How the social technical design of the platform is shaped, what are the politics of shaping that, but also how does that then shape patterns of trade and economic outcomes. So as one example is that they have reputation systems, right? If you do a good job, your buyer will rate you and give you 5 stars. Now, if I come there as a buyer to look for a provider, obviously I'll sort by reputation. I'll pick the person with the most 5-star ratings, right? But obviously this creates a Matthews effect, where then that person's track record keeps growing. They win more and more trade, and they become more and more. They separate more and more from the pack, thanks to having a nice track record. The market tips in their favor.
But can they leverage that on the price that they are then actually selling?
They can to some extent, yeah. That's a good empirical question. So what advantage do they get from that? So one of the things. So first, but for now, just understand that it's not such a level playing field. Some people, thanks to the institutional embeddedness they have, or thanks to the social technical design of the system, they end up kind of being the winners there. What we then found was that they start outsourcing the work to other people. So one transcriber, for example, Mary, very astute businesswoman, she had a great profile on Odesk for transcribing, and she was winning a lot of work. So she just put an ad in the local yellow pages, transcribers wanted, and built her own network of online transcribers. And so she would get all the work from the international clients to Odesk, and then outsource it to the local network that she had. she did add some value to the process, because she, in the end, she was responsible that quality was good, the deadlines were met. So if one of these downstream providers didn't meet their promises, she would then have to quickly get that work done by someone else and manage the process. She was adding value to it in the form of providing this kind of level of service agreements type of thing there. But clearly she became a new gatekeeper, and she was making a very nice living with this, whilst paying what minimum what the market could bear there. And these people obviously didn't learn anything about the customers, so they didn't really have any ability to forecast demand or improve their operations to better match the customers' needs. Another thing that we found, and we've just submitted a paper about this to American Sociological Association, so, and I'm happy to share that paper with anyone. But we basically found 5 different types of these network patterns. One was what I just described, where someone just then outsources to work through a commercial relationship to local freelancers using their local knowledge. Another one was using family and friendship networks. So we found several cases where, you know, you go talk to a person whose face you know from their Odesk profile, and then they bring some brother or sister there and say, oh, this is the person who actually does the work. I just do the job interviews, you know. Typically, like someone who has a nice face and speaks decent English is the marketing face of the family. And then the less marketable family members, who are nevertheless very good workers, they do the actual labor. So very difficult. So that's another model. Another model was this kind of reciprocity, where people will have profiles on different platforms, for example. I've got a great profile on Odesk. My friend has a great profile on Elance, and we pass each other work. And it can be reciprocal, so that there's no money changing hands, or it can be they can take a cut, like a sales commission.
What's the role of the gatekeeper here? Is with this big blue squares, or what are the providers of the platform that is doing it? So it is a gatekeeper as well.
Yes.
And
so
it's taking money out of it.
That's
so
a very,
what's the difference between this lady with a good profile and the gatekeepers?
That's a very good point. So often we say that these online, or in the policy discourse for World Bank and so on, they say that online labor markets disintermediate this trade, and they cut out middlemen. But actually, obviously, they are a middleman themselves, right? They're a middleman themselves. And they can take a nice commission. Odesk takes 10% of transaction value, so it's not non-trivial, but it's not huge either. And my current feeling is that they are not that powerful gatekeepers, and they are disintermediating in the sense that there's competition in this. There is not just one Odesk, but you can also go to Elance or Vlance or any number of sites. And this competition between platforms does keep, I think, probably the commissions in check a little bit, as opposed to a traditional model where you have one wholesale buyer in the country, and that's it. There's no alternative chocolate buyer that you can go to down there. Basically because of political connections. Yes.
Well, I think we need to start wrapping up, Vili.
Yeah.
But the follow-up on that, though, that on the other hand, they do collect enormous amounts of data of both the supply and demand of work. And you could imagine that as such is a kind of a value provider, not the commissions, but the data on, you know, what's needed, and maybe the power of clustering supply, clustering demand is something that the platform provider could do, maybe much more than what they are doing now.
You're right. So at the moment they're just being kind of down marketplace.
Yeah.
They could do
they could twist that into more like an active labor power in a way.
You're right. So yeah, this is actually my last slide. So I'm going to wrap up. This shows the average earnings per country, hourly rate. Very. You can't draw many conclusions from that figure, because it's influenced by what kind of work is provided by that country. So you know, even though we see Chinese are earning a lot more than Indians, it's not that Chinese workers are necessarily paid more than Indians for the same work, but that they are focused on more higher value-added jobs than Indians and so on. But I thought this picture is just a good way of...
you just tell us what the figures are, because we can see.
Okay, well, the yellow is 2.7 to $10. Orange is $10 to $15. Well, orangish. Well, and then the top category is 30 to 55.
Hourly.
Yes. And this is actually based on just 1 month of data, which is why we have a lot of countries where there's no supply, but the 6 months data you see more going here as well.
This is from the oldest.
This is from this is from oldest data. So I'm jumping from data set to data set. But before we go to Q&A, if there's time for that, I will just wrap up by saying that, okay, so we're at a point where we can see clearly that these online labor markets as a way of facilitating connections between buyers and sellers of different types of labor. In Western, very structured labor markets, industrial organization, yes, they do appear as a force of precarization and marketization of work that has implications to workers and probably to the way our social security system should be organized in the future. That we can't rely anymore on the idea that people are either employed in a company or they're not, but we will see the increase of portfolio work, of fragmented work and so on, and online labor markets will be part of that. At the same time, in the developing world, where these kind of structures don't exist to the same extent in the first place, this work is welcomed by policymakers. They see it as a great opportunity and so on. I am concerned, though, that once the next sort of global economic downturn hits, obviously this online staff is the first staff to go, and people now in Philippines and many other countries in large numbers are directly exposed to this economic risk. There is no more buffer of gatekeepers and long-term contracts that absorb fluctuations in demand, but it's individual breadwinners and individual persons in these villages, basically, who will directly be impacted by changes in global demand. And I think in development policy as well, that will be the next challenge. So the iLabor project, that is continuing this work, but it has, the focus there is very much on the platforms. The politics of the platforms, because we have to understand that these platform owners are now new private policymakers. They make labor policy for people in Kuusamo and Rovaniemi, who are no longer touched by Finnish labor policy because they work on these markets. What interest do these private policymakers take into account when they formulate their policy? What are their policy objectives? How is that policy expressed in design, in the socio-technical design? The UIs, for example, that they develop in very concrete ways influence what people can or cannot do in those markets, in the same way as legal rules influence labor markets, more traditional labor markets. So these are the questions that the iLabor project will look at, both using data analysis to develop an index that tracks the development of this cloud labor over time, as well as through qualitative study. And I will be hiring a brilliant data scientist around April or May. So please keep in mind, spread word to your networks. The advertisement will come out hopefully on next month or month after. And social scientists will be hired towards the end of the year, so keep that in mind. Postdocs basically. All right, but I will finish there. Sorry for going a little bit over time there.
Well, that's fine. How about now? I mean, before closing this session, so 3 questions. Any questions to Kai can start. Then there.
Apart from this becoming from an individual service provider to becoming a sort of a gatekeeper, did you identify anyone sort of climbing up the ladder from doing at first, very, mundane micro tasks, and then going up and delivering or providing some more complex tasks, and then also earning more?
That's an excellent question. I'll answer briefly. So and that's what the policymakers are also very interested in. It's all built into these policy stories that then people will upgrade and from micro tasks to programming, and the next day will do the next Angry Birds there. In the qualitative interview data, we have some stories of people upgrading the positions. We also have excellent data from Odesk, how because they indicate their skills and qualifications in various ways in the platform, using tags by completing formal tests that they are competent in a programming language, for example. We have all the data, we just haven't had time to look at it to see whether that upgrading is actually happening in scale or not, and where is it happening. Is it only the Americans who are upgrading? Are the Filipinos also upgrading? It remains to be asked, but it's a very good question. 2 more questions?
Yes.
So I was wondering that there's also a kind of a area of going from online work to physical work. If you look at Uber,
yes,
it is actually working exactly with the same premises,
yeah,
and the work is physical. So have you considered that part on how that is? Is that also an interesting question?
Well, I spoke about that on Wednesday on the Uber and so on. But so I think you're absolutely right. It's part of the same phenomenon. Obviously, so when we talk about service work, which is more locally bounded, then there are different dynamics at play that have to do with the local labor market. It's more local regulations have a bigger handle on that. We can legislate for Uber. It's harder to legislate for Odesk. And the original iLabor proposal doesn't really talk about Uber, but I'm going to try to study that as well.
How mobile is this workforce? Do they migrate from Odesk to freelance, or go run to the next guy if they have a better bid? Or
I think that's a great question. I don't have a very good answer to that. Obviously, one thing we find in interviews is that these people always have profiles on different sites. They always have, they hedge their bets, they have profiles on different sites. But of course, what you see in the data is that people are very invested in one platform. They've got a great track record in one platform. It's very hard for them to migrate to but they will take a hit if they migrate to a different platform. So I think there's forces acting both ways, and I don't have a very good answer to that.
Social lock-in.
Yeah.
One more.
What's the stance of the tax collectors if the wages are in bitcoins or whatnot?
Well, so for example, in Philippines, government people talk. They said that they're consciously. Well, first of all, let me say, no one we talked to said that they're paying any taxes on this.
Mm.
Either they didn't answer that question, or they said that no, I don't. We're not paying.
Why would I?
Yeah.
Mm.
Then the policymakers we talked to in the Philippines, they said that we know and we're letting this go under the radar because we want to promote this market. We want to encourage this. Policymakers in Europe and US we haven't spoken to, but I doubt that they would be as interested in letting this go under the radar. So I think it would be a concern.
I'm sure. Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Vili.
Thank you.
So we actually do need to close because at noon we have another HIIT doctorate, hopefully a doctoral graduate in defending at Aalto School of Business on gamification, Juho Hamari. So it's happening in Runebergkatu.
Next lunch talk already next week. Nimble Devices will be talking about Indo positioning right in this house at 12:30. So let's tune in next week.